Hey everybody, welcome back for Season 2 of the Broken Banquet Podcast. This season we've got more interviews with missionaries around the world, more interviews with authors who have written amazing books about missions, and more conversations about what it means for us to abide with one another. And yes, probably a story or two about Ashley taking a walk, eating food, or having drinks with someone who she now loves. We're so glad you're back, we're glad to be back, and we hope that you will enjoy this episode.
Tamara Boone, let's talk about this basketball season and how excited we are.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll be back in a few minutes. You guys let me know when you're ready to, talk about stuff that matters.
I'm so excited. So excited. I think Duke and Carolina might see each other once more, maybe twice more. Who knows?
Definitely once more, I think. Here's what I'm hoping. Caleb Love, Player of the Year for the Pack, and then RJ Davis, Player of the Year for the ACC. And what if they end up playing together in the NCAA?
That would be fantastic. As long as Caleb Love doesn't hit a three-pointer over the outstretched hand of Armando Bacot.
There you go. That's a good call.
Like he did against Duke.
Hey, were you at that game?
I was. Were you?
I was at that game too. It was in New Orleans. Well, fantastic story here.
Can't wait.
Oh, were you watching that game? Were you watching that game?
Was I?
Yes.
Let me just orient the two of you. I think Ashley by now understands it.
He just doesn't care.
While I was there, I went to just about every game for a 3-year period. I grew up in a Duke family. I grew up fighting at the bus stop in the mornings, with the Carolina vans, during ACC season, during, when I was in elementary school and all that stuff. I was into it. And then I moved to Central America 20 years ago and just have paid less and less attention to college basketball ever since. And a thing that really kind of sealed it for me was this. I just hate this whole one and done thing. When I was growing up, you had guys on the team for 4 years and they cared about the school, they cared about one another, and it was a team. And I just don't like what it's turned into. So I know that may sour some people. And I just have a hard time getting excited about it. I don't know the names of anybody the people you all just mentioned. I have no idea who any of those people are. I didn't watch the game that you guys went to and were really excited about. And I'm excited that you guys love it as much as you do. I'm just not a very good ribbing partner when it comes to Duke Carolina basketball anymore because I'm just completely disconnected from it, which I never imagined. Growing up, I never thought that I wouldn't care that much about Duke basketball, and I never thought I would stop surfing. And both of those things are realities in my life now that are surprising to me. But I'm sorry to be a killjoy and a party pooper, but I'm just not.
I have a theory, man. I have a theory. Okay. If you had gone to Chapel Hill.
Oh, my God.
If you were a Carolina fan, you would still be a fan. That's where I'm landing. Because a lot of things you were describing about, the one and done and the loyalty to the team and caring for one another, those things still exist.
So that's only a phenomenon. I see. Well, if you guys want to talk about idolatry today, we can get into that. Where your heart is and that sort of thing. I'm open to that discussion.
God's favorite color is Carolina blue.
Such silliness.
Oh,
Great. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, thanks for letting us give you a hard time, man.
No, I'm happy. You're welcome to fire at will, literally. I'm just afraid you're not going to get much.
Well, listeners, we have a treat for you today because you've listened to this opening wonderful banter between Will Bailey, your co-host extraordinaire, myself, Ashley Goad, and today we have with us Jeremy Boone, whose wife Tamara broke the banquet.
She's still breaking the banquet.
Her listens are way, way more than anybody. So, Jeremy, you have quite the task ahead of you.
I'm probably not going to. I'm keeping my expectations low. In fact, I may refer you back to her podcast during this podcast on numerous occasions.
We'll link it
My
back.
wife is awesome. You should listen to her podcast.
Well, we're very excited that finally you have joined us on The Broken Banquet Season 2, probably episode 20 by this point. I think that Jeremy has been the most difficult booking that we possibly have had on The Broken Banquet. You know, Brian Fickert, Dwayne Elmer, Sherwood Lingenfelter, all of these authors that have had, you know, bestseller books, all those things have not been as hard to book for an interview as dear Jeremy Boone.
Which I think just speaks to what a busy season in Jeremy's life our podcast has sort of forced its way into. But Jeremy, we're glad to have you.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you guys having me. And for sure, I'm not difficult to get a hold of because I'm busier than those persons or as eloquent as them in speech. But yeah, it has been a busy season, and I think maybe something that'll come up during this podcast. Part of it has been just a difficult season that I've come through as a missionary of 15 years, being on the field and then going back to the States and being in the mental health profession and trying to process through what just happened and what I'm getting back into. So some of that just because, sometimes I just don't want to talk.
That's understandable.
Yeah, right. As much as I love you too. And there's something about being on air, like being on video.
Yeah.
Somebody listening to me and kind of the expectations that come with that. Sometimes I don't like walking into. And maybe there's some listeners who can relate to that. Being on stage. I don't like being on stage very much.
And I can relate to that. I mean, because before we even pulled the trigger on starting this, I was like, really? Like, do we really think that there are people who care at all about what I have to say about my experiences as a missionary? And thankfully, the feedback we've gotten from those people is that they do care about hearing these stories and kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly about all of this. And I think people appreciate us being willing to share and be vulnerable and that kind of stuff. So we're grateful that you come to the table in spite of some of those reservations. It means a lot to us.
Well, if it were called like the banquet of the put together, I would have probably denied your request.
The Perfect Missionary podcast.
Right. Yeah. Because it's the Broken Banquet, I'm here.
Great. Awesome. That's why we're here too.
Well, let's start at the beginning because I have a story about how I met you, and it does involve a walk in food. But I think that you could just give a nice little blurb about who you are, Jeremy. I mean, we went to Appalachian State at the same time and graduated from Appalachian State nearly around the same time as each other. But I never met you there, so we can't talk about that. But why don't you just give a little blurb about who you are, and then I'll jump in. I'll parachute in with how I met you because it wasn't until after you were married to Tamara.
Okay, well, that's a really broad question. It all started when I was a twinkle in my father's eye. I did go to...
So, Dieter, I'm not going to make it the same.
Well, a little bit about my origin. Mm-hmm. I'm a bit of a mountain boy.
You grew up in North Carolina. Tell us about how that, shapes you.
Well, my father and mother both were born in the Appalachian Mountains. Both born to relatively poor families. And my dad comes from a long line of, from among the Scots. In fact, if you're interested, I'm Daniel Boone's great grandnephew.
Whoa!
Yeah, this is a true story. Yeah, true story. I'm not sure that the generation behind me even knows who Daniel Boone is. But at any rate, it's a big deal to me. It's a part of our rich heritage. I'm actually direct descendant of Israel Boone. But so a mountain boy. My dad was a bit of a hillbilly, and I'm a mountain boy, and grew up in a small town called Black Mountain. We had 5,000 people. Now it's booming. But just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Grew up religious. Or was a religious guy. Grew up in the church. Anytime the lights were on in the church, my mom and dad were pretty much there. I started off in a KJV only church, a fairly rural church with those messages that kind of start in crescendo into almost song, very, very rhythmic. A lot of dancing in the aisles. I remember being scared a lot as a kid. I mean, I love going to visit that church now. But at the time, I was just kind of scared as a kid. There was a lot of preaching about hell and hellfire, and brimstone. Those were real things, but very engaged in the church. But by the time I got around to high school, honestly, looking back, I never heard the gospel. Or if I'd heard it, it just never made its way to my heart. And so, I did go to App State. In fact, I went to App State like 4 or 5 times because I was a wild child. I had really no sense of identity by the time I got to college. I hadn't worked all that out. And I was working with existential questions about, who is God? Is there a God? Who am I? What's the meaning and purpose of life? What do I do with issues of suffering? These were like right on the forefront of my mind as a young college kid. And they were so depressing to think about, or so difficult to work with, that I spent a lot of time running from the questions. Mm-hmm. Hence the time it took, which was 8 years to finish my bachelor's degree. By the time I'd gone back to finish my bachelor's degree, where I met my wife, I had sorted a lot of this out. I'd heard the gospel, and I'd fallen in love with Jesus. Became a follower when I was age 21. So that's probably one of the most important things about me, is the fact that I'm a follower of Jesus. But it came the hard way. It was I really felt like I had nothing to offer myself, to offer my roommates, to offer the world. That's really where I found Jesus, and all that got sorted out. It was hard to imagine making the world a better place when I couldn't make myself a better person. And, the way I kind of think about it was, I was trying to they talk about rearranging the chairs, the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's what my life felt like. And I was like, man, I don't really need resuscitation as a human. I really want a new life. Like, if I could have a new life, that would be great. Resurrection was what I was looking for. It just took me a while to hear the gospel and actually know that that's what my soul desired most. But I was saved around 21 and finally did finish my degree. And by that time, I was already thinking about the mission field. That's when I met my wonderful wife. Married, I've got 4 kids now, 2 adopted, 2 biological. My oldest is 17, youngest is 8, about to be 9. I'm a missionary in Uganda.
I was just gonna say that Isabella and Samantha are 1 year and 1 day apart. So
is that right?
Yeah. So Jeremy, your youngest, and Isabella, Will's daughter. Mm-hmm. These are my fun facts. I'm just gonna throw in some fun facts just to keep it light.
Well, I know my daughter is gonna be fond of your horses when she gets there. So maybe she'll have a chance to hang out with your daughter.
We can't wait. Can't wait for them to meet and get to. I'm sure they're going to be fast friends.
Me too. So I'm a missionary in Uganda along with my wife. My kids are missionary kids, and there've been a lot of different iterations of our life and ministry here. So 15 years in, and now I feel like I'm 15 years new to the mission field. Mm-hmm. With different vision and pioneering kind of new terrain. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, I might have said this during Tamara's episode. I should have gone back and listened so I didn't repeat myself. But maybe I can repeat myself. But when I came to First Methodist in Shreveport in 2013, and they had this vision to create a mission partnership on every continent, the first 2 emails I sent were to Will Bailey and to Tamara Boone. And that was in 2013. I did not go back and look for the timestamp to see which one I sent first. But maybe BA for Bailey versus BO for Boone. Maybe I sent Bailey first, then Boone. I'm not sure. But that was how our expansion into global mission started, was with your 2 families. And that's what sent us on this journey for the last 10 years. And we, as a church leadership team, came to Uganda probably within 3-4 months of me arriving in Shreveport. Y'all, this was my first visit, I think, out of Shreveport to go see a new mission partner. So we came to Uganda, and before I even saw Tamara, and I hadn't seen her in years over, except for other than Skype. But we got to Kampala, and my friend Michael Badriaki, who one day we might get him on the podcast. He's just a great guy. We found you when you were teaching at a school or a community center out in the middle of nowhere, and that's how I met Jeremy Boone for the very first time. I walked up, gave him a really big hug, and felt like I had known him for my whole life. That's
crazy. Well, I'll try not to take offense if you were first.
Yeah, I've asked Ashley several times if she would go back into the archives, and I really need
check the timestamp on that.
Yeah,
that's pretty important information. Yeah.
We changed email servers, so I can't get back to that old email account.
The world will never know.
No, in fact, I remember meeting you as well. That's pretty early on in our service here in Uganda. And in fact, we were in the throes of difficult stuff. And I just thought to myself, man, I don't know if I can handle another partner. That's worth unpacking maybe at some point. But can I really handle another partner? Could I handle another short-term team? Do I want to be responsible or accountable to another church? Because we already had a number of people involved with us. And I was thinking, at that point, I actually kind of wrote down this is what I would need if I was going to partner with someone. And I'm going to be completely open and transparent with Ashley. I don't know her. It'd be nice if they were supporting our ministry, but I'm gonna lay out sort of who we are and what we need and what we're up to make sure that this is our good fit. And I thought I was gonna scare you off.
You didn't. Look, you're stuck with me for life now.
I remember it being a really affirming conversation. Just
really?
Oh, I think she sees us. She loves us. The relational piece. Because I think so often churches and institutions, not to give them too hard of a time, but it really is easy sometimes to become more mission focused than missionary focused, or somehow or another the missionary gets lost. And that does feel heavy. It feels heavy when you feel like you have more responsibility now. And yet you're still kind of dealing with less care as a missionary in the field. But I didn't feel that way when I spent time with you, and nor have I. In fact, you and your ministry to us has been one of care for us as missionaries, so that we can care for those that God sent us here to serve. And I'm thankful for that. I felt that in the beginning, and that's true up till now.
Jeremy, can we dig into that a little bit more? Because I think it's interesting. I bet there's some people who are going to hear this who would think, wait, why would any missionary not want more partners? Why wouldn't they want more resources and more whatever kind of images they have that would come along with more partners? Can you talk a little bit about what were some of those sort of reservations or hesitations that you had? What would have made more partners feel burdensome? I know my answer to some of those questions, but I think it'll just be good for people to hear. Yeah. We talked a lot about what we hope to accomplish through healthy partnerships, but I think it's good to name some of the things that are unhealthy about unhealthy partnerships,
It's a big question. First thing I would say is probably there are a lot of people who wouldn't be afraid as long as there's money involved. Having said that, on my side, what was it that made that feel like it could potentially be burdensome? I think some of it is just what are the expectations that would be on me as the missionary? Okay, so you're going to become a partner, prayer partner, financial supporter. What does that require of me? Am I going to have mission drift in order to, make sure that you guys are happy? Am I going to have to orient my life and my ministry around kind of your desires because you're a major supporter? And so, so part of it was just concern about the expectations of the church and about, just ensuring that we didn't drift from what it was that God was doing with us here in the field, making sure that it was a good alignment in terms of our, what is mission? How do you accomplish mission? And do we agree on this work together? So that was part of it. But of course, that was, at least I can say with most of our partners, it's been dispelled by a mutual understanding about what is mission, how are we going to accomplish it? Are we both responsive to the Holy Spirit? Do we understand that this could be messy? Are we okay if I don't show up at your church and stand up on stage and, try to perform to make it sound like missions is just like this romantic thing that we're living? But is it okay that sometimes it's hard and that I might need to talk to you about that? Are you if I come and I talk to you about, hey, this is what's happening this year. It's been a hard year. This is what's going on. Are you going to fire me? Or are you going to love me through that? Are you going to help me to heal and to get back on track? So, I think, maybe those were some of the things that were kind of going through my head. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's the short-term team thing too. That's the thing that's really, really hard to do well. And so if there was going to be expectations that we're hosting short-term teams, like, is it okay that if you come that you spend time with me and my family, loving us? Or do I have to host you to be loving on the people of Uganda? Maybe that's what my family needs right now, but maybe it's not. And is it okay if it's not? There's just some things that kind of come to mind.
I think that's something that you helped me learn, was that I needed to not have the expectations, that my expectations needed to depend on your expectations. And that's something that I think you all taught me as a mission pastor of how to create our ministry, is that it is our job to listen to you, to hear your expectations, to hear your needs, and then act appropriately. Letting, what Will likes to say all the time, letting the relationship drive whatever comes after that. And that's something that I very clearly heard from you, and it helped me in all of the other relationships that we developed, so that we could act in this healthy manner of how we go forward. And that became kind of the motto for our team, is whenever we go anywhere in the world to see any of the people with whom we're in partnership, I want them really upset at the airport that we're leaving. Like, don't go. This has been the best visit ever. Instead of, thank God you're getting on this plane. I'm exhausted. And I hope that the rest of our visits have been that way, other than the times that both of you all have had to take me to emergency rooms or something. Yeah.
Jeremy, I appreciate you laying it out that way. And I've had conversations with churches that have wanted to get involved with our ministry, and they're wonderful people and they're super motivated, but the things that they want to do don't always line up with the ministry that we've been called to. And you have to be honest. And early on, 20 years ago, probably for the sake of getting things going, I didn't always do a good job of that. But I've had to learn how to say, you know what, guys, I think the gifts and talents and resources that you all have might be better used with someone else who what they've been called to lines up with the kinds of things that you feel like you want to do, because it's just not, it's square pegs and round holes. So I can relate to that. When I describe our relationship with First Shreveport, and I think I said this in the video that you all made while we were all together on that retreat, was that you all love us, our family, first, and the work that we do together in Costa Rica second. And that's, I think, more of our partner churches over time are starting to understand that. But for a long time, it was a very unique relationship. The fact that your emphasis was on my family and our well-being and our mental health and spiritual health and everything else, so that we could better do the work that we've been called to do and lead this ministry and that kind of stuff.
There's more to what you're saying than meets the eye. And I think it gets to the heart of what is really mission. Is really mission primarily projects and programs, or is it people? If ascending churches, we prioritize mission or projects and programs rather than the discipleship of the missionary, ensuring that they're prepared for the field, that they're healthy, that not only are they prepared, but they're resilient while they're in the field, and when they come back, that they're reintegrated in a way, where they feel loved and supported, rather than alone and isolated, which is pretty easy to happen. But if churches are not really emphasizing discipling their missionaries, what do they expect really that their mission is going to look like in the field? And what do they want it to look like? It might be a question to ask. Do you want it to prioritize mostly programs and projects, or do you want your missionaries to be out there making it about discipling people as a means of accomplishing the mission? Well, the answer is we want them to be discipling people, seeing that people are everything that God wants them to be. And programs and projects are going to come out of that, right? Ministries, organizations, church institutions, they're going to be born out of this discipleship. But if that's the answer, then disciple your missionaries and make that first and foremost. And I do think that a lot of the lack of discipleship I would say that even myself, it's hard for me to keep oriented sometimes. There's sometimes a tendency to wander away from making people the primary objective, because God is building this church out of living stones. And that's true. And I know that, but I tend to wander from it. And I do see that a lot of missionaries in the field tend to drift. If the church is not discipling their missionaries, it's unlikely their missionaries will disciple those they've come to serve. So I just think there's a lot that you're saying there, and it's central to what mission actually is.
You've used the phrase mission drift a couple of times. I think let's define that for people, because I think it's natural for us to evolve over time, seeing the needs around us, our calling evolves over time. So what would you say the difference between mission drift and just a natural evolving and growing in Christ? What's the difference in those couple of things?
Yeah, I'll kind of go back to what Will was saying earlier, and allowing the relationships to determine, kind of where we're going here. First, relationship to Jesus. And then secondarily, a relationship with the others as we help, we host them, as we help them get to know who Jesus is and to walk alongside of him. But so I think anything that sort of there's a lot of ways to disciple. There's a lot of ways to do that. You can do this in a myriad of different ways. And it's one of the beautiful things about being a follower of Jesus. You don't have to be a missionary to be a disciple maker. You can be literally anyone in the world with any resources or no resources. You can be the poorest, you can be the richest, you can be the most educated, you can be totally uneducated, and you can 100% engage in the work of the gospel and be, a honored part of God's church. I just think that anything that sort of gets you away from that fundamental truth. I would say, again, so there can be so many different iterations or evolutions of what it looks like to actually be about making disciples. And, in terms of actually drifting, I would say it's anything that undermines the call to help people become everything that Christ has made them to be, which is kind of my simple way of defining what it means to make a disciple, to be a follower of Jesus and help them become everything that he's created them to be. So anything that kind of that orients you towards another goal, and that often is a project or a program where you begin using the relationship to accomplish your project or your program rather than making the relationship primary or ultimate. Making the discipleship primary or ultimate. And then, as a result, you've undermined, and people know the difference. And I almost feel like it's a spirit, right? I mean, people know if you're just loving them to get an outcome, or if you're loving them because you love them. And so, loving people because Christ loved us, loving people because is there a greater thing than to love God and love neighbor? Is there a greater thing? Is there a greater calling? So just not drifting from that. And I think discipleship helps kind of put bones on love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Discipling them, helping them know him, and to walk in his ways and to be everything he made them to be. As long as we don't drift from that and undermine it with other primary or ultimate goals, which could be very good goals, right? Feeding the poor is a very good goal. Caring for orphans and widows, visiting the prisoners. These are very, very good goals. Building a church, great goal. But I think it does come to the question of how are we doing it? Mm-hmm. And how, if we drift from how I think Christ showed us to do it, that's mission drifts.
But I hope that people are hearing that if we don't do the hard work of the relationship building on the front end, then regardless of people's good intentions and generous hearts, what we wind up doing together actually might not line up with what you're saying, with what the mission actually is. And so the hard work of those relationships are easy when everyone just agrees all the time and they're all on the same page from day one. The hard work of relationship is bringing people to a table where they don't all agree, being honest with one another, and then getting to a place where you can still be fruitful together in spite of, some different personalities and opinions and motivations and that kind of stuff. But I think it's so important to achieve that level of honesty between us as missionaries and the communities that we've been called to serve, but then also for us as bridges between the people that we're bringing into relationship with us and with these communities. And I hope that people hear how critical that is, to the point where some missionaries will even say no to some potential partners if the feeling is we're not going to have that kind of healthy relationship with one another that's going to bear the right kind of fruit. It might bear some fruit, but it might not be bearing the right kind of fruit. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. In fact, there was a partner who once sat down with me at lunch and said, "I have $100,000 with your name on it." Now, for me, that's huge money. We're an equipping organization, and so we're not feeding hundreds of people. We're not building buildings. We're not, funding staff primarily. So that kind of money was kind of crazy money to me. And I sat there quietly, like, I better be sure that I answer this appropriately. And after sitting there for a little bit, kind of dreaming about it, I just said to him, "You know where I work. You see who I'm working with. I think I would do more harm than good with that $100,000. And so, I don't regret that. I don't regret that at all. I really sat and thought, like, how could I use that money in a way that would empower this community? And because I couldn't come up with an answer, doesn't mean there wasn't an answer, but for me, I couldn't think of an answer to actually employ that money in a way that I thought was going to love the people well. And so I denied it. And so kind of to your point, There are times we have to pass up on those partnerships or on those finances because of what's going on in the communities or the people, what's happened with the people that we serve. Money's not always the answer.
Right.
That was certainly true where I was serving.
Well, let's get back to you, Jeremy. Let's fast forward maybe like 8 years or so, and you had been working in Jinja with the Karamojong for a while, and I think you saw the need for something. So let's talk about your transition from Jinja to Wheaton College. What did that look like? Why did you feel the need to go move your family to the States for 2 years and work on a degree?
I think it's worth saying that 14 years ago, before I went to the field, I was saying to God, there are 3 things that I'll never do. One, I told him I was never going back to school. Secondly, I told him I would never want to be a pastor. And third, I told him I didn't want to work with the Karamojong. That's a long story. I probably don't have time to tell it here. But, interestingly enough, now I have done all 3. When we were here our first 15 years, I ended up planting a church and pastoring a church for about 8 years. And then more recently, over the last 2 years, went to Wheaton and got my graduate degree. So, yeah, I think how we ended up in Wheaton was really just, there were a number of issues, kind of the same way that everything has happened in the mission field. For instance, well, let me just say this. As a elder in the church and as someone doing humanitarian work in Masese slum, in our urban slum here with the Karamojong, the spiritual and emotional needs of the people were just profound. And not only did I struggle to meet those needs or minister to those needs, I struggled with dealing with those needs personally, to the extent that I thought I need somebody to help me deal with what's happening here, on a spiritual and emotional and even physical level. And so I think a lot of what transpired in terms of setting our course for Wheaton was just how affected we were personally by the tremendous spiritual, emotional, and physical needs of the people we were serving, both in the church and in the urban slum. And just a desire for us to be healthier, for us to be better equipped so we could be okay. Our cup would be full, so that we'd have something to give. And then of course, having some greater skills and abilities to be able to meet the needs that we were seeing on the ground. And interestingly, like one of the first conversations I had with someone that I knew from Uganda, he worked in the State Department. He was a psychologist for the State Department in Uganda. And it was either the day I left or a couple of weeks before I left for the field. And I just remember him saying, it's really hard to do a good thing. I said, do you have any advice? He said, it's really hard to do a good thing. And I found that to be true as an outsider, with all the language barriers and the cultural barriers and the socioeconomic differences. It's been, and I think a lack of understanding, and with the American perspective, like if I can just, money can make this better. I don't really have time to deal with this, surely we can speed this up. It was really hard to do a good thing. This guy was really, really right. But the thing that I got to know was that as an outsider, people wanted to talk to me. That was the one thing that was like so natural. I'm an outsider. I don't live in your community. I'm not your pastor. I'm not your parents. I'm not one of your community members. Anything you say to me is going to be safe. It's not going to get back to the people that could potentially feel a certain way about what you're going through or shame you for what you're going through. I saw this reality that I was an outsider as actually an advantage in my ministry to the Ugandan people. And so that kind of got my gears turning, just in my own need of the people around me, and the fact that my outsider status was actually something I could leverage to provide a listening ear and counseling to people in need. So that's sort of what sent us back to Wheat.
I just want to draw attention to what a wonderful example that is. We don't need a definition now of mission drift compared to mission evolving. You being sensitive to the people around you and the needs that they were expressing to you naturally is a way for your mission to evolve, right? That's a healthy way for you to evolve into something that maybe you never even considered when you were first going into the field, which is completely different than drifting into areas of ministry that you're not supposed to be in because of some influences and not miscommunication, but just visions that aren't lining up and that kind of stuff. The way that you describe that process and that sort of evolution, I can relate to 100%. When I was sitting in my last semester of classes in seminary, dreaming about moving to Costa Rica, I was not dreaming about the things that we're doing right now. A daycare center for children, a counseling program, housing for young women. None of that stuff was on my radar. And all of that stuff that we're involved in now, it's because the community has communicated to us, these are some needs that we have, and maybe this is a place where we could come together to meet those needs. So I think if anyone was still maybe wondering kind of about the difference between a mission evolving and mission drift, I think by now that's pretty clear. So thank you for sharing that part of the story.
That's true. And that's I can't even count the number of iterations. I mean, when we first came to the field, I had a set of ideas about what we would accomplish. Thankfully, we were sent pretty well. So we were sent as humble learners. We have a saying with our organization, hit the ground sitting rather than hit the ground running.
That's awesome.
So we hit the ground sitting. We took a lot of chai. We had with the locals, we had a lot of conversations. We tried to build some strong relationships. We were trying to figure out who the main stakeholders were. We were looking for peacemakers, people that were receptive to the gospel. Those might already be following Jesus. Those who seemed primed, so, those are the kinds of things we did early on. And then, what we were hoping would be a community health group so that we could, increase the health of this community at large on a number of levels, really became medical relief. We were in medical relief for at least the first 4 years. We did community health, but a lot of it was medical relief and vaccine campaigns and things like this to try to stabilize the community because it was so sick and dealing with so much unneeded illness and death. So, that's how we were responsive to the needs at that time. I remember writing a blog called No Development While Medical Relief is Pressing. That was the name of that blog. But I just remember the struggle was trying to put some sustainable programs in place while people are sick and dying around me. And the struggle with that. And then, and over time we ended up entering into advocacy. We were in advocacy for a while because long story, but just making sure that mothers and fathers, their children could live with them if at all possible. We're just trying to empower parents so that, we weren't unneedfully removing children from their care and, isolating them from their family or, God forbid, sending them to be adopted when they had capable parents in the community. So we were involved with that for a while, which was very controversial and very interesting. And then from there, we planted a church, and that was kind of born to become a church planter. Ashley's heard me say this, but in terms of just responding to the needs, if the church had told me I was going to be a church planter when I came here, I would have said no way. And if I had told the church I want to go plant churches, they'd have been like, yeah, no, thank you. Yet, we were responsive to that, because it's just what God was up to. We felt a need to be in community with God's people. There was no gospel proclaiming church in the community at the time that where the Karamojong and others could really connect. And there was also not a reproducible church where the poor could get involved and imagine doing that in their own communities, or if they went back to Karamojong doing it, in the uttermost of Uganda. But it was just what God was up to, and so we ended up planning the church, which continues. I remember at the time thinking, man, talk about mission drifts. Here we are responding to, of course, these are our needs as Christians. We need to be in community, in order to be healthy. But others were crying out, we need to be in community. And so many of the people that first came to our church were also other missionaries or Westerners. And I was thinking, what does this have to do with the Karamojong? We're trying to reach the Karamojong with the gospel. And I'm thinking, this cannot be the way. Yeah, we've drifted for sure. Well, now, how many years later, 10 years later, our church has taken in and sent a Karamojong man to reach the Karamojong people. And it's not just me sending them as a lone missionary, but it's our church who's gotten behind him, loved him, cared for him, helped educate him, visit him, encourage his family, who bring him in when he comes for a visit, because it's a hard place to live. So to bring his family in and care for him, and then send him back when he's encouraged, to go and find him there and encourage him in his ministry. So God knew what he was doing. I had no clue. And I think the willingness to be responsive to the Spirit, to be flexible to that, is why we have what we have. We don't have it because it was my plan. Our church didn't send a Karamojong missionary to Karamojong to make disciples there because of my plan. It was because I think we were responsive to the Spirit. We trusted God knew what he was doing, and he did it. So I give them praise for that. He knows better than us. But it was a roundabout way for sure. It's not the way I would have done it.
So now that you have this master's of counseling degree that you worked so hard with, loved visiting you as you evolved over the couple of years in Wheaton and found your calling and found great opportunities for training and seeing how God worked in your family's life over that time. Now you're back in Jinja after being in Wheaton for 2 years with 4 kids who lived in the U.S. for 2 years and now back in Africa. How have things gone? What's that transition been like, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, it's been different for every member of my family. Yeah. I would say easier for me in some ways than everyone else, and mostly for very good reason. We had amazing community while we were in Wheaton. My wife made amazing community while she was there with our church and with fellow parents from the local schools. Our kids really connected with many of the students. So the process of leaving for them has been pretty hard. The transition's not been easy. They really miss their people. Yeah. And, for me, I was really connected to my cohort, and my cohort scattered. So they went kind of all across the globe. Mm-hmm. So, but by leaving Wheaton, I didn't lose my community. I was going to see them leave. In some ways, it was easier for me to not be there when they all left.
Yeah.
So, but transition's been, the kids often say I want to go, but I don't want to leave. Mm-hmm. It's kind of how my kids say it. Mm-hmm. And that I think that's a pretty good way to put it. Since they've been here, my whole family really has embraced life here. We've remembered the things that we love about it while mourning the things that we miss about the States. Yeah, overall good. Lots of tears. Tamara's been a shoulder to cry on for all the kids, and I've been a shoulder to cry on for her. And maybe I could cry on y'all's shoulders.
Anytime, Brent. Anytime.
But it's exciting. But at the same time, I think one of the things I love about life here is just the pace of life, and I think it's discombobulating when you leave the American pace of life and come here. There are a number of things that are discombobulating. That's a big one. And so in the beginning, it's like you're slowing everything down, which means you're more present with each other. When you're more present with each other, kind of like the COVID season, people either thrived or they wanting to kill each other because they were just more present. And so, we've been, I think because we're more present with each other, it kicked up a lot of stuff, that like wasn't good in our family dynamics, but it also gave a stage where a lot of healing could come and where we could really see what Jesus had to say about it and let him minister our hearts and do some works of reconciliation, I think. And it's all of it, man. It's just a big ball of like everything, it's mourning the loss of community, of course, family, but it's also loving a lot of life here, but in all of it, seeing God's purposes. And I think my kids, I'm amazed, man. Like, it's certainly not me as a father. I'd give a lot more credit to Tamara for sure, but somehow or another, like, my kids really have embraced life here. They don't seem bitter or resentful about the big shift. They seem to just like try to be faithful and take what God gives them and be joyful, thankful about it. And so, to be honest, I'm really loving the dinner table right now at night. It's really sweet. Yeah.
Your dinner table is one of my favorite places to be. So we were talking earlier. You were talking earlier about how you're a safe place for the community members to go to. And being in your home, I can attest to that because your door is just a revolving door. People are coming in and out of it all day long to talk to you, to talk to Tamara, to talk to your family. And sitting at your dinner table at night, it's not, sometimes it is just the 6 Boones, which is great. I love that. But then there's also community members who come in and sit at that table too, because you've made a home. Like, people feel like they belong. And I feel like that when I come to your table too, is I feel like I belong.
Thanks.
And that's just a testament to I think who you all are and who God has called you to be. So
yeah, thanks a lot, Ashley. I appreciate that. And that is a big part of what we love about being back as well. Church is now back on at our house. So our church kind of moves around, it's mobile, it's multiplied, it's come back together and multiplied again. And it's a growing church, but we've had it here at our home recently. And what a gift, man, just to have God's people around. It wasn't always that way. I mean, I remember with my first years being here, it was like I was slinking around the house, like trying to, like pulling curtains, kind of still trying to hold on to that idea of privacy that, I had from all my years growing up in the States. And, there was just a process of sort of me relearning how to do life and what to do with this issue of privacy while I was here. Yeah. Now, like when I was back in the States, like, man, dang, we're so private in this country. So I love people knocking on our gate, honestly. And I love having, we got the men's discipleship on Thursdays. And I'll just poke my head out. Sometimes I'll sit with them, greet them on the way coming in. There's worship on Fridays. There's church here on Sundays. And God's people are just coming and going depending on what's going on any particular week. I just love that part of life here. It's really conducive to just loving relationships. It's really conducive to discipleship. And I love the pace. It's great. So transition's been really sweet. Yeah, the other thing I would say about transition is just that we're excited to be, we're now currently where we were in 2009. So, in a lot of ways, like I said, like old missionaries new. We feel like we came back to Uganda. In some ways, for my kids, it's like the first time they've ever come to Uganda because they've only ever known here. They're all born and raised here. So they've never really come to Uganda before. And, so seeing it through fresh eyes, that's been really, really sweet. And I think for sure, Tamara and I and our whole family are praying, God, what are you up to during this season? And it's fun because before it was just Tamara and I doing that before we had kids. Now we get to do that with our kids around the table. And we're all praying and asking God, show us, help us to be sensitive again, to be responsive again. Show us how you're moving in us. How are you orchestrating sovereignly, the world around us? Where do you want us to invest wisely our gifts and abilities, our time? And so pioneering again, after 15 years, starting fresh is just fun. I love this part. Tamara doesn't like it all that much. This is like one of my favorite parts. So I'm really, really excited about what God's up to, what he's going to do next with, our 15 years of experience, as well as with this new set of gifts and abilities. So there's no shortage of need here in terms of mental health care. I think the hard part is not saying. I think it's honestly, it's being really careful about what to say yes to, and being willing to having to say no to a lot of things in order to, invest wisely. Part of this visioning's come to see where you're working, Will. I want to come and see what you guys are doing.
Can't wait to have you here and introduce you to our team and staff and let you see, especially what Yolanda and Priscilla are doing in the counseling program. But it's great to hear you excited about this season and the new stuff that's going on.
And it's exciting to know that in 2 hours, University of North Carolina will be playing in the ACC tournament.
See, here's what I thought she was getting ready to say, listeners. It's also really exciting to know that in just a couple of months, the Bailey family and the Boone family and Ashley's family are going to actually get to spend some time together in person, just abiding with one another and deepening that friendship and relationship and supporting one another. And then that you all are actually going to follow us back to Costa Rica and spend some time with us in Costa Rica. But I mean, there's basketball too.
I am so excited about that trip though. It's my last trip. So we're going to end it with a bang.
Yeah. Last trip. That sounds way too final.
Mm-hmm.
Let's rephrase that.
Okay.
In this capacity.
In this season, it will be my last trip. So, and listeners will fill you all in on that later.
Well, Jeremy, thank you. Thanks for spending time with us this afternoon for you. Really, I've enjoyed learning more about your journey and really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability and your wisdom that you shared with us and with our listeners. And I know it's going to really mean a lot to them to get to hear from you.
Thank you too. Thanks for inviting me to the Broken Banquet.
Absolutely. And any morning that I get to wake up and spend time with you is a good morning. So hug your wife for me and tell her that I love her.
Do the same, please, both of you.
We'll
hug your people. Tell them we love them.
Bye, Will.
Bye, Ashley. Bye, Jeremy.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to The Broken Banquet, a podcast by Will Bailey and Ashley Goad. Music provided by Irene and the Sleepers. Join us next week for another episode. He's prepared the table. All things are ready. Come to the feast.